Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Maartje.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we have a very special episode because SAS Rogue Heroes is coming out on January 1st. It's been announced pretty much today and it's all over the Instagrams. And to celebrate that, we have two guests on today. One of them is our recurring guest, George, who is a bit of a nerd, has a lot of SAS books, as you can see. And the other guest is Ben Simmons, who is a military advisor on SAS Rogue Heroes on season 1 and 2. And also has some other cool credits, like The Crown, which I know very little about. Ben, thank you for coming on. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name's Ben. I'm an ex-army officer, and I now work in film and TV as an advisor. So that includes helping productions put together scenes that involve things like the army or any kind of battles. Also teaching actors how to portray people who are in the forces, and also training actors how to be safe with guns as well. And excuse the cat.
All of us except for Sam have cats, so we're used to the cats. Could you tell us a little bit about what it means to be a military advisor on a show like SAS? And what does your average day look like?
Oh God! Well, it is my favourite job. What an advisor does depends on the production. So on Rogue Heroes, my main day-to-day job is going through all of the scenes that are going to be shown that day, making sure, going over the script, and I would have been over the script a number of times, but going over the script probably for the 10th time and making sure that all the language in there is correct, making sure that all the details are in there are correct. Then it's things like making sure that the costume is put on correctly. There is an amazing costume team who do 99% of that work. But occasionally it can be me on set rearranging headdress or anything like that. Then normally what will happen is I'll be stood probably somewhere between the director and the first AD, in sort of shouting distance of the director. So if he needs to ask something, he can get me over quite quickly. But normally with the first AD will sort of use me to sort of get everybody in the right place at the right time and advise on things. It's really strange because no one day is the same. You can have a day with lots of dialogue, which is completely different from a day with lots of stunts and lots of gunfire. But most days I'm sort of looking over pretty much everything, talking to all different departments, being available for anybody to ask me things, and being there for the actors to talk to as well when they have something they have to ask. But no one day the same.
Could I ask you a follow-up question then?
Of course, yeah.
What time did you get involved in the production? Like, is that before shooting? Is it like months before? Is it a couple of weeks before? Or just...
Again, it depends on the production. Some productions I can get a call the night before and they say, we need somebody to come down for the day. Would you come down? With Rogue Heroes, the first season, I got a call probably about 4 or 5 months before we started filming. And the second one, probably, I knew we were doing season 2. Season 2 was greenlit quite quickly. So before it came out, which is very rare for the BBC, season 2 was greenlit, I think, after episode 1 and 2 had been cut together and shown to people. And the excitement got quite, it sort of built up quite quickly. And so I think season 2, the warning I had was probably more like a year. But then in terms of what my involvement would be at that sort of very early stage, not much, just sort of a mark your diary and wait. But then what will happen is the scripts will start to come through. So I don't advise Stephen Knight, who writes the scripts. He has a historical advisor himself, and he has a team that does research for him. He does a lot of the research himself as well. So I will get the fully formed scripts. Sometimes there'll be a first draft of a script. Sometimes it'll be a script that's been through 3 or 4 drafts. But then I get to cast my eye over it and get asked to give notes. And so that will be sort of the earliest stage I will be involved in. And then as things get nearer, then the costume department will be in touch, and they'll start to talk about various options of things. The art department as well, who are brilliant, they do a hell of a lot of research and work. They can get in touch and start to ask me things, and it sort of gathers momentum. But the prep stage is normally sort of a couple of months, maybe 3 months for me, and then the filming. Each season took about 6 months to film, and then once all the filming's done, then it gets cut together, so I can be involved in the edit as well. So when an episode is cut, I'll get sent the rough versions of it to be on the lookout for anything that's not correct, that sort of got through things, or because a lot of things can be chopped and changed order wise in the edit, so things can be cut out that now no longer make sense, or additional dialogue can be recorded. Normally somebody's shouting commands off screen, and sometimes I've got to make sure that those make sense as well to what's happening in the scene. So my involvement is mostly on set, but a lot of stuff beforehand and a little bit afterwards as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, this is not the question we were going to ask next, but I feel like it's fitting. So I guess a lot of what you do is really about technical historical accuracy, and we talk a lot on this podcast about when is it more important to be historically accurate versus what are acceptable changes for narrative purposes. Like, is what's most important getting kind of the vibes and the heart right? And we talk a lot about, a few weeks ago we did Fury, where it was very like technically historically accurate, but it really felt like they kind of like missed the boat on some of the other stuff, on some of the broader narrative stuff. And I was thinking about, the director, David Ayer, who made Fury. I feel like a lot of the choices that he made are for people who are really worried about someone holding the gun wrong, or, whatever the case may be. What about that?
That's probably the most difficult part of my job. So I don't make any decisions. I don't say it has to be like this. We've got to change this. There are a lot of people that have come from a background like myself and have tried to do the same job, and they don't get very far because they don't know how to necessarily work with people and don't understand what the job entails. The job is like if you're playing, let's say, a round of golf. I don't play golf, but the caddy comes along with the person that's playing the game, and they advise them on what shot to take, what clubs to use, etc., etc., etc. If the golfer wants to do what they want to do, that's absolutely fine. I don't get upset by it, because it's their game at the end of the day. So when it comes to advising, it's always a balance between historical accuracy and story. There was another historical advisor. I can't remember her name, but she was a historical advisor for sort of Tudor and Stuart type stuff. And she was saying, I want people to make informed mistakes. So when they make errors, or when they do things that aren't technically correct or historically accurate, they know that they're doing it and there's a reason for it. What is not good is when productions make mistakes and there's no reason behind it. It's just because they don't know, or because But whenever I come to a production with potential changes. Bearing in mind, I can't make the decision to change things. I've got to persuade people to change things. Depending on the production, I will either work to the producer, and the producer will want me to try and help the director, but not slow things down, not cost the production any cash at all. So I've somehow got to keep, because film and TV production is such a massive beast. Any sort of slowdown costs tens of thousands of pounds, and any sort of changes cost as well. So I've got to be cost neutral. I've got to not cost the production anything at all, which can be quite difficult. So there's always a balance to be struck between what is accurate and what is worth the production's time and money. When it comes to something like the BBC and Rogue, the BBC are a public funded organisation, so they don't waste any cash at all. There are big sort of Hollywood productions that go into the millions, hundreds of millions of pounds. Rogue, on the other hand, is done for relatively little. And so not a pound is wasted anywhere. Everybody's working exceptionally hard to make every pound count. And so when I'm speaking to the director, I'll have the producer behind me saying, do not mention anything. Don't give him any ideas that are going to cost money and they're going to extend the day. So I've got to be very conscious of that. So any changes I put forward, I've got to do it in good time. So I've got to do it as early as I can, and then I've got to give good reason for why these changes have to happen. Sometimes because of the way the story is structured and because of the way the story is being told, changes can't be done because they will unhinge the way the story is being told. So the writer has spent a hell of a long time. Stephen Knight, amazing guy, has spent so much time developing the story and the characters throughout. What I've had to learn is all about story, so that I'm not, when I see something that's incorrect, I can identify, right, is that incorrect because it needs to be that way because of the story, or is it just a historical error? If it's a historical error, brilliant, we can change that straight away. But if it's part of the story, I've got to be really, really cognizant of that, and it's a much harder change. So is it about historical accuracy? Is it about good story? It's about both. It's about trying to find that gap in the middle where both can exist at the same time. When it comes to Fury, it's interesting because my job in the army was a tank commander. So all of my friends, when Fury came out, we went and watched it. And what happens very quickly is the number of tanks gets reduced down to just Brad Pitt's tank. And then Brad Pitt's tank gets stuck on its own. And then Brad Pitt is stuck on his own, on the gun, surrounded by 200 Germans. We're all so that to go, well, this is a bit unrealistic. That wouldn't happen. You get on your own. And then if you were Brad Pitt on a tank, one of the Germans would have shot him. They had him surrounded. And so that is where the accuracy goes away. And it's because of the story. And it's because they need to, there's no, this story about, this very powerful story about this one tank, this one man standing up against all those Germans. If it was historically accurate, that wouldn't necessarily happen. So a lot of the time I've got to take a back seat and go, I understand this is inaccurate, but I know why it is inaccurate. And therefore I'm not going to necessarily push it too much. I can't be annoying too often. I've got to really pick my battles. So I've got to decide on a particular day, like, is this the one thing this week that I am going to get on my high horse about, or do I let this one slide, knowing that there's something bigger coming up later on that I need to, save my good grace for? Because if I go around trying to change everything, then I get really unpopular very quickly. And when it comes to really big stuff, then I can't make the changes.
Has there been anything that's been kind of heartbreaking that you weren't able to change?
Oh, loads of things. Absolutely loads of things. Not on this TV show in particular, but always the biggest problem is berets and headdress. And there was one production that I was advising on for the script, and I was saying to them, like, do you want somebody, I can send somebody down for a day to help you get the actors dressed to make sure they look correctly, make sure the berets are correct. And they said no. And I was like, are you absolutely sure? It's not going to cost much. It's going to be a tiny detail. And they said, no, 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 no. And it came out and the berets were all like awful. They were absolutely awful. And I had my head in my hands because it's one of those things that anybody from the military looking at a TV show, that's the first thing they look at. And if that's wrong, they just go, well, I'm not going to bother watching any of this at all. So the berets, like that's always a problem. And if you're advising on a show on the script, you don't necessarily get to be on set. But with Rogue, we had a really interesting problem in that the berets that the SAS first wore were too small for them, and they didn't know how to wear them. There's a really good picture of Jim Arman's where it's sort of, he's wearing it like a side hat, where it's halfway on the top of his head and coming out here. And if somebody turned up on a TV show wearing a beret like that, the number of emails I would get would be, hundreds of people going, what are you doing? So even though it was historically totally accurate to have them in berets like that, it looked wrong. But also we couldn't put them in modern berets because that would also look wrong. So we had to find this sort of halfway house style where they looked sort of like a hybrid between the two. So they didn't look completely mad, but they didn't look perfect and modern either. So, but no, normally I sort of try my best, and I know that I've tried my best to get a production on, the straight and narrow. And it's quite rare that I go away thinking, I could have done more. Normally it's the case of please let me do more, and then but you have to be pretty sanguine about the whole thing.
Has it changed your sort of experience as an audience member of watching shows like this?
Yeah, 100%. Because now I know the constraints that film and TV productions are under, and I know that not everything is done with the military person in mind. Somebody who's going to sit down and watch it. But my aim is to try and make it better than if I wasn't there, which may be a very small barrier, but it definitely made me more relaxed about watching these kinds of things. But I do still comment on things when I'm watching them on the TV. And Jess, my partner, I have to sort of she has to sort of suffer me going, well, that's not accurate. That guy would be dead straight away. Bullet would have gone straight through that wall. And there's loads of things that you just have to sort of remove the military brain and get into civilian watching mode and ignore all of that, because otherwise you can't enjoy half the stuff that's on TV.
I mean, I think all of us feel similarly. We watch things and sometimes you just got to dial your brain down a little bit.
Yeah, you've got to just take it for what it is. There's no fun in picking things apart. Nobody actually gains anything from that. So sometimes it's better just let it wash over you.
It is when you're on a podcast, to be honest.
Well, yes, yeah, okay. That is different when you're critically examining something, sure. But have there been any things that you guys have noticed about series 1 that you've gone, why did they do that? That's not accurate. Why have they done that? Has there been anything that's bugged you at all?
This is definitely a George question.
I know. I was waiting for this to come to me.
Go on.
But I take a really strong view of things that serve the story are fine, and things that tell me about a character are fine. And so I'm very much not like a fully vibes-based person in terms of historical accuracy, but I let a lot of things slide because I feel like, okay, but you've now told me the why of this character or the why of this scene. And so that's fine. And that's what I felt with Rogue Heroes a lot. I mean, there are other things where I go, well, I did notice that was not right, but I don't know why it served a purpose. I won't name them. So they bothered me, but nothing, I can't think of anything in Rogue Heroes that sort of really got under my skin in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I noticed that there's a film called Sandcastle. Have you ever seen it? It's about 10 years old now. It's one of Netflix's first films. Probably not even 10 years old, maybe 8, 9. And it is Nicholas Hoult and it is Henry Cavill. And it's about a small unit. It's a really good watch. But it resonates with anybody from my generation in the forces because it's all about trying to do the best in a difficult situation. And it's set in Afghanistan, I think. I'm pretty sure it is. And at the start of it, in the opening sequence, the first sort of 60 seconds or so, I went, well, that truck is too old. That knife that he's got didn't exist for another 3 years. And immediately I was like picking holes in it. But then the story was so good that I completely immersed myself in it. And that taught me that if a story is brilliant, if a story is good, if a story engages people, then they don't notice all these little things in the background. There are loads of films with mistakes, not just historical mistakes, but all kinds of mistakes in terms of continuity, things disappearing in the background, the same background extra appearing 17 times in different scenes, but you never notice it because the stories aren't engaging. It's only when the stories get a bit rubbish that people start to pick up on these things in the background because they're not engaged with what's happening on screen. So the good thing about Rogue is the story is so good and written so well and the characters are so engaging that you don't really have a moment to start pondering what's happening in the background or looking at the soles of boots because you are so focused on what they're doing. But normally, so the things that people pick up from Rogue is the trucks in the first few episodes. If you look at the convoys, the further back you go, the more modern the trucks get, and that again comes down to budget. So the BBC, that opening scene where they're in the desert in a convoy and they're running out of fuel, the first probably 8 or 9 trucks are historically accurate. And then if you go further back, they're all sort of 1970s US trucks. The reason being is because for that one scene, we were filming in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, to get all of those vehicles to that place for that scene would have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. So instead, what the production did was they hired about 10 or 15 trucks from the Moroccan army who were based not far away. And it was so much cheaper than trying to get old vehicles started and running in the desert and getting them there in the first place. So this is why I say the BBC have got to be very careful about how they spend things. A sort of massive sort of, US Marvel-esque production would never have any problem with doing that. But for the amount of money that it's cost, it's the cost versus the benefit. So there was that. And then in the very last episode, when Sterling gets captured, there's a tank. And again, that's a Moroccan M60, so a US tank from the 1970s that has been mocked up to look a little bit German. But as a tank commander, I was looking at that going, that's not a German tank. That's not a World War II German. But it doesn't matter. Again, that was filmed over one day and in the middle of nowhere. And the cost to get a genuine German World War II tank there would have been horrendous. And that would have meant we wouldn't have been able to have a gunfight, or that actor wouldn't have a part. So, there's always a balance to be struck. There's no sort of infinite cash pot.
I can also imagine that vehicles like that, they're pretty delicate at that point if they're like time period accurate, right? And if you put them in a desert, you don't want them actually breaking down either. So there's that as well.
Well, this happened a lot. We had a brilliant vehicles team, and their job was to maintain the vehicles, get them to set, and we had five jeeps for the whole show. And it looks like there are scenes where it looks like there's hundreds of jeeps. There was only ever 5 jeeps, and those jeeps did absolutely everything. And the vehicles team were replacing engines. They were doing all sorts on the go. And they were brilliant. They kept these vehicles going. But funnily enough, the most reliable stuff was the oldest stuff, like the Chevy trucks that are, knocking on for 100 years old. I was very lucky to drive them a few times. And they were brilliant. They lapped up the terrain, and they were indestructible pretty much. But then there would always be something, running out of water, and water just exploding, and somebody having to running repair on something. So the vehicles teams were fantastic. But there was the first sort of leaked, or the first papped picture of Rogue was the vehicles being transported to Morocco on the boat. They were all on a low loader, and there was a Kugelwagen, 2 Kugelwagens, some trucks, and somebody packed them as they went through. And it was like, what's all this? Where's it off to? And it had some of the German symbols on it, so people were sort of trying to identify what this was and where they were off to. So yeah, but the vehicles were absolutely great. That's the great thing about the show. Like, every department is brilliant, and every department is doing so much work behind the scenes to make it look as good as it does.
We heard that you had a personal connection to SAS Rogue Heroes, an ancestral connection. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. So I didn't realize this until fairly recently, because the book came out a while ago, and I can't remember exactly when I found out, but my great uncle, who was Billy McLynch, was in 11 Commando at the start of the war and fought at Litany with Maine. Ended up in the SRS, so the Special Raiding Squadron, who we may or may not come across in season 2, and he fought with them through Italy, and sadly didn't make it to the end of the war. There is an incident that happens in a place called Termoli, where he was amongst 20 other guys who lost their lives all on one day. And it's a sort of it's a remarkable story. He'd been injured the week previously in a battle that he got awarded the military medal for. He never knew he won it because he was written up by Maine. He got it posthumously because there was. I'm not going to spoil it because the incident happens in season 2, but yeah, it's a pretty tragic event. But there were I believe it's the biggest loss of life the SAS have ever had in a single day. Although I think something like that. So it was quite strange doing the research for season 2 and suddenly seeing all of these pictures, which were the site where he died and all of that. It was, having never met the man, but it's sort of quite strange when these sort of family connections come back. And so it was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the show in the first place. And I'm very happy to say that his little part in it has been portrayed quite well.
So I think it's my turn. Sorry, guys. So, speaking of season 2, we have some questions specifically about season 2 without spoilers. We're going to try and keep the spoilers to a minimum. So, obviously, we've all seen season 1, but how does season 2 differ from season 1, would you say? Does it differ?
It does. And it differs significantly in that season 1 was very light-hearted. Season 1 was almost a boy's own adventure. It was romping around the desert in the dark, blowing up planes, and it was all sort of naughty boys doing stuff and things. Season 2 gets a lot harder because the SAS are fighting face to face with German troops. They are not attacking, troops in the rear, hundreds of miles behind the lines. They are attacking head on. And so the kind of warfare that they're dealing with is very different. And season 2 does a very good job of looking more at how that kind of warfare and the length of time these people were fighting for, how much of a toll it has on them as individuals. Particularly Sea Kings, as George's favourite, is he has a hell of a lot to deal with, and this is all real. So there's a wonderful documentary that you may have seen. It was never broadcast at the time, but in the 1980s, was it the 1970s? I can't remember. Either late 70s or early 80s. There was a documentary with some of the originals, and it was interviews with some of the originals, and all of them throughout are talking about sort of the hardships that they went through. And every time they speak, you can see that how it's affected them. You can see the stress it's imparted on them over the years, and they've carried some of this weight. Except for Sea Kings. Sea Kings is very matter of fact, very sort of sat back. He's quite his face is quite firm, and then they start talking about the events that we're going to be seeing in season 2 of the show, and you suddenly see it in his eyes. He's breaking, and it's a really powerful thing when you see somebody who is that much of a rock to everybody else and is the hard man. You can see the cracks. And that's what season 2 is all about, really. It's about what effect it's having on these guys. So it's a quite a different mood. It certainly starts off in a similar vein to season 1, but as it goes on, it gets a little bit darker, a little bit deeper. And episode 6, not to spoil it at all, but there's some really very moving scenes in that, and in 5 as well. I mean, the second half of it is all gets. Yeah, if you can watch that and not blood, good luck. Yeah.
Oh no, I've been stealing myself for a long time. But I was lucky enough to see the first episode at the BFI recently, and I think without spoilers, I've been dying to talk to people about it, and I can't. I think it's quite evident how deep into character it already goes right from that first episode, in a way that it did in season 1, but not quite sort of for everybody. And I feel like already there's this sort of evidence of deeper workings of the internal psyche of these men, and I'm finding it fascinating to go down, and I'm really looking forward to seeing. It sounds very strange to say looking forward to seeing that play out, but
looking forward to seeing them having a terrible time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's certainly got a lot more feeling behind it than season 1 occasionally touched on these things, but season 2 really goes into it. And yeah, it gets it's definitely a different beast. Somebody described it as if season one was season one was a New Hope. Season two is The Empire Strikes Back. It's in yeah, in sort of the tone of things, it definitely goes places that season one didn't, for sure. So, George, what did you think of episode one without spoiling?
Without spoiling, spoiling a little bit because we've seen it in the trailer, is that we know we've got new characters, and I was really impressed with how quickly they were integrated in the dynamics of the group. And I think, again, the group dynamics are what really got to me in that whole episode, because they are all very much clearly the same characters we saw in season one, but there is a real sense of how their own sort of interactions with each other and with the war they're fighting has changed them already. And I thought that was interesting. And then I can't say too much more because it is, but no, I had a really good time.
We'll have to come back. But what I find fascinating about the TV show is how much the real world has mirrored the TV show. In that season one, everybody was stuck in the desert together. A lot of pressure was on Connor playing Sterling, and season two, suddenly we're ripped out of the desert. All the pressure is now on Paddy / Jack as he takes the lead. It's a very different war. Adjusting to that, new members of the cast / new members of the team. Again, so going back to the inaccuracies for story reasons, so we get introduced to a couple of people who, in our story, they're portrayed as joining the SAS in early 1943, whereas actually these guys joined much earlier, but sort of fitting the narrative and the story. That's sort of the first little inaccuracy that you see. But then again, there's a wonderful having chats with all the cast. Gwyll, who plays Sterling Senior, is he as an actor was always sort of slightly not trying to prove himself, but very aware of the fact that he didn't do the desert part, which is replicating entirely how Bill Sterling felt, or feels in our story. The fact that he's trying to make up for the fact he wasn't involved in that part. You get Jack playing Maine, who's got all that pressure on him now, and soaking it up, but very much understanding what we call the loneliness of command, which is when everything's resting on your shoulders, and so you've got to hide yourself away a little bit from everyone else. You are no longer part of the pack, you're the head of the pack, so you've got to behave in a very different way. And again, this is exactly the same as happening to Maine as happening to Jack. Then you got Connor, and Connor and Sterling Jr. So David Sterling in our story is locked away and missing out on all the fun, which is very similar to what happened to Connor. So Connor was locked away filming these scenes on his own while everybody else was off filming. And so very much that sort of isolation and feeling like you used to lead the gang and now you're entirely separate from the gang. So a lot of this is sort of coming out in their performances because they're going through it. And so it's sort of a fascinating watch.
Yeah, even the genre of warfare is different. We go from these really small scale sort of like hit and run attacks to like, obviously the landing at Sicily at the time was the largest amphibious landing in history, and sort of, what they going to do at Termoli and that kind of stuff. So even like the type of warfare is different. Was there, even from like a preparation standpoint, was that like quite a bit different this season?
Not really. So the preparation side of things, I always wanted to do a Dale Die style 2-week boot camp. Season 1 we couldn't do it because we were filming during lockdown, and so we literally couldn't get the cast until the day they started to film. So I had to try and steal them for days to do training. So the first few weeks we were filming a lot of the HQ stuff, a lot of stuff with Jock and with Sterling. And so I'd grab all the other cast and give them training as best I could. But Connor and Alfie got relatively little training time, and then season 2, similar kind of thing, but hampered by everybody's schedules. Going back to I've got to do things that cost the production as little money as I can. Again, I wanted to do something like a 2-week boot camp. It came down to about 2 days because, again, trying to get all the cast at a particular time would have extended their contracts by 2 weeks, which meant hundreds of thousands of pounds and all sorts of stuff. So I had to be quite economical with my time of how I was going to train them. But certainly there was a lot more. The battles you see are a lot more sort of traditional warfare battles in season 2 than they were in 1. Again, going to historical accuracies, talking about invasions and seaborne invasions. In the Sicily-Italy period, the SAS were involved in maybe 3 seaborne assaults. The BBC doesn't have the budget to do 3 seaborne assaults, and also it would be quite boring to have 3 seaborne assaults one the next week. So the first one is sort of as is, and then the later attacks have been changed primarily due to story and budget. But there's preparation wise in terms of how this was different. Specifically with Theo, was really talking about how these guys must have been feeling and the kind of stuff they were going through and how they were keeping themselves going. Most of the preparation and all the questions that the actors ask me are more often than not about how the guys would be feeling, what they would be thinking, rather than how to do an attack necessarily, because ultimately this story is about the people.
Yeah. I was just thinking really quickly about your tiny mini version of the bootcamp. Like, if you only have 2 days, what do you focus on?
So focusing on mostly bringing them together as a team, not just them, but I take out a small team of guys. I had 10 on season 1. I had 8 on season 2. Young guys that you'll notice are in every single scene. They play the rest of the SAS. So if you go back and look at season 1 and 2, you'll see some of the same faces. So I think I had 4 guys who were the same from 1 and 2, because a lot of it is about the camaraderie and the teamwork. So everything I was doing was trying to get them bonding as quickly as I could, because they are going to be relying on each other throughout filming in terms of knowing that the guy next to you firing a gun is going to be safe. The guy driving you around in a Jeep is going to be safe. And bringing in the new members of the cast as well this time round, getting them, meeting the rest of the cast and getting sort of stuck in as quickly as we could. Because as you said, it's all about the relationships between them. It's all about how they interact with each other. It's all about how they bond and deal with each other. And that is, a lot of that is coming from how it is in real life as well. and getting all these guys working together. And they are brilliant. They hang out together. They are all friends. They have a hoot together. They drink together. They play games together. Season 1, because we were all locked down, they were playing volleyball together, water polo, boxing together, all of this stuff. So the training I was doing was primarily giving the confidence with firearms so that they would be safe and look good on screen, and also bringing them together as a team. Those were my 2 aims. Season 1, there was a bit of an aim as well to get them ready for the desert, get them used to and acclimatized to functioning in the desert, because the days were long and the days got really hot. And if it hadn't been for the acclimatization, they would have started to drop like flies. So that was a key part of it. Not so much on season 2. Season 2, we were filming in Croatia, so Croatia wasn't nearly as hot. But there was also a couple of members. There was one member of the cast who didn't know how to drive, so he learned how to drive on a World War II Jeep. So he had to drive for some particular scenes. So yeah, there's whilst I always wanted to do like a platoon style boot camp, actually it's not really necessarily for this job, because it's not just an action film. It's more about the people. So yeah.
Very cool. So is there any particular part of season 2 that you're looking forward to seeing on screen? To see your work maybe, or to see just because it's cool?
Well, so I've seen all the episodes because I get involved in the editing. Not as in doing the editing. There's a very good team that does that. As in, I get to give notes for stuff. So I've seen it all on a small screen. I was very lucky to see episode 1 and 2 on the big screen, and the biggest change between 1 and 4 on the big screen, the biggest change between me seeing them on the small screen and them being on the big screen is the VFX team. The visual effects are brilliant. So the visual effects team have done a cracking job of making everything look 20 times bigger and 20 times more expensive. And so episode 1 in particular, George has seen this, so they'll know it feels massive. It feels massive. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've done with the episodes that I've not yet seen. I think for me, episodes 5 and 6 are really, really sort of key in where these people are going, where we're going to see them going in season 3 and hopefully 4. And I think I'm really looking forward to seeing those 2. I think, yeah. Having seen 1 and 4, 2 and 3 are good as well, but 5 and 6 is really where it flows.
Why 1 and 4? Why not just 1 and 2? Is there anything specific about episode 4?
We had a cast and crew screening, and they showed episode 1 and 4. I think because they're the most action heavy, I think. And they but yeah, I think that's why. I'm not entirely sure why they decided to get first time round. We sat down and watched 1 and 2, so I'm not sure why they decided to do that. But yeah, I think because they're most sort of VFX and action heavy, I think perhaps.
What's the reception of the show been like for you personally? Just getting feedback from people.
It's been really good. It's been lovely to see how much people have enjoyed watching it. And the biggest compliments come from people who say things like, I sat down to watch this with my wife or my partner. They didn't want to watch it and they loved it. Or there was amazing day where there was a historian, I think it was Sir Anthony Beevor, and Caitlin Moran, who's a writer. So Anthony Beaver wrote something about it being great to watch, and she wrote something about she said something about I couldn't think of a show that I would be less likely to enjoy, and I loved it. So seeing sort of the broad appeal it's had across the board has been great. It's been really rewarding. It's one of those rare shows that a lot of people really like, and there's a lot of people who complain that the music isn't correct. I mean, personally, I love it. I love the AC/DC. We didn't know that it was going to be put to that kind of a soundtrack until about halfway through. So once we'd done the UK shoot in for season 1, we had a little sort of screening where the editing team had put together a quick sort of teaser, and it was set to sort of AC/DC, and we suddenly went, my God, this sounds brilliant. So there are a lot of people that complain that AC/DC doesn't match. I respectfully do not agree. I think it's absolutely brilliant. A lot of people can't get past things like the trucks being wrong or the tank being wrong. A lot of people are not happy with the portrayal of Maine, but these are in the minority compared to the general public. Most people think it's great, and the number of people that have said to me, really enjoyed season 1, can't wait to see 2. And yeah, so it's sort of, it's weird. It's one of those shows that nearly everybody loves.
Mm-hmm.
That don't, it's not going to, you can't please everybody.
No, I think we were talking about how the show seems to have appealed to that broad audience. A lot of women have liked it, a lot of queer people, as demonstrably in this chat. But did you even know during filming or during preparation for it that this might be that kind of show?
No, not even slightly. The one thing I've learned from this show is that, so Stephen Knight, the writer, when you see things on the page, that a script is quite strange. It's not like a book. It doesn't give you all the detail. It is literally a quick snapshot of where you are and the dialogue between the actors. But there's very little sort of direction on how it's delivered. So it's the skeleton. It's not the whole thing. And so it's then down to the directors and the actors to interpret that and turn it into something else. And me coming from not an artistic background, reading the script and the way that I read it, and go, I don't really get that scene. I don't really understand it, and then seeing it and go, oh, that's what they were going on about, and suddenly seeing it come to life and going, oh, right, okay, I did not, and all of the stuff that's happening on screen, I didn't get any of that from the page because I'm not used to reading a script in that way and having to interpret it. And so for me, it's sort of learning that what appeals to people is not necessarily the words that people are saying. It's not necessarily about what's written down. It's about everything else that's happening. It's about the costume design, the fantastic costume design. It's about how an actor delivers a line, and it's all of these things that go into it. And there are so many different ways that script could have been done, and they've done it in a way that is everything to everybody. It's cheeky, it's sad, it's fun, it's rude, it's everything that people want bundled into one. But it's got to have that skeleton, that script to start with. I can't even remember what it was that you asked, but I hope.
No, it's true. We always joke on this podcast that a lot of war movies or shows struggle from all these white guys look the same. And like sometimes war movies and shows get really bogged down in these like caricatures and these like stereotypes of people. But SAS Rogue Heroes is very, I mean, we have a couple episodes on SAS Rogue Heroes where we talked about this at length, but it's just the emotional beats are so important, and the things that the characters are going through so obviously inform what they're doing. And that's like huge. I think that's why like so many people really enjoy it.
Sorry, I just remember what it was you all asked me. You said, did I know that it was going to be how it was? It's like, and the answer is no, because you can never see exactly what the director is seeing. You can see something on the screen, but the director in their mind has got everything laid out and knows exactly where things are going to dovetail and fit in, and knows exactly what came before this scene, exactly what's going to come after this. So when you're watching individual scenes, you don't really, when you're seeing it being filmed, you don't really get the full picture. It's only when it's being cut together, and the editing team, again, fantastic. It's only when they've picked their shots, they've cut it all together, and it can be something that's not written down. It can be the camera cuts to somebody for just a look, and that isn't in the script. But that look, based on everything that's happened before and everything that will happen, has such meaning and depth to it. So no, when it was being filmed, when season 1 was being filmed, we knew that it was good, but we didn't know how good. And it was only when I got to watch the edits very early on, and this is why it got greenlit for season 2 so quickly, because they were so good. And then I remember this distinctly, when we went for the cast and crew screening, and the cast haven't seen it. The cast have been involved in little bits of the dialogue. So ADR is when they go in and re-record lines or change the wording a bit. So they'd seen little bits, but they hadn't seen the whole thing. And the cast, every single one of them, came out of the screening and went, wow, I had no idea it was going to be that good. We all knew there was something there. We all knew it was going to be special, but nobody knew quite how special it was until we saw it in the round. But there's so much work across the board, so many different departments all working together that turned it into.
You mentioned briefly that some people aren't happy with Patty Main's portrayal. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more what that would be?
Yeah, so Paddy Main was a very complicated man by all accounts, and there's no real consensus on exactly who he was and how he was. All the people that served under him said that when he was sober, he was a consummate professional. He didn't swear, but he was the kind of man that you would follow anywhere because you trusted in him, and he was an innate leader. He knew exactly what was the most effective thing to do at any one time, and so his leadership was second to none. So a lot of people are upset that the portrayal of Paddy Main in this TV show doesn't quite match up to that. And I'm sympathetic to that view, but also the story is going somewhere. The hero that they know, he will get there. But there are troubles and strife he's got to go through first. But there are so many different versions of Maine. There are so many different legends and myths. It's very difficult to identify which, if any, of them are correct. And so you can have some people complaining that Maine is being portrayed as somebody who fights the whole time. And then you hear these stories written by the men who served with him saying that when he drank, he would get extremely violent. And there was even a story of a soldier turning up to parade with a black eye. and Paddy Mayne going, who hit you? Show me who hit you. I will knock the guy out. And the soldier apparently didn't have the heart to say, well, it was you, sir. It was you that punched me. And because when he drank, by all accounts, he turned into a different man. He was a very complex man who was obviously dealing with a lot of stuff under the surface. And because the only thing we have of him are stories told by other people, there are so many different versions of who he was. But one of the stories I love about him is a soldier came to him when they were back in the UK. A soldier came to him and said, "Sir, I would like, a day's leave to go to London." And he said, "Why?" He said, I would like to propose to my fiancée of A to B." And apparently Mayne not only gave him 3 days off, he paid for his train, and he paid for a night at the Ritz or something like that, and a meal. He really looked after his men, and there is a sense that history hasn't been kind to Mayne. That there have been certain aspects of him that have been a little overlooked in favour of the more sort of bombastic stuff. So one of the things that is evidence from the records that we have is that Sterling was rubbish at keeping any kind of paperwork. He wasn't the kind of officer that would write stuff down or draw up stuff. So actually the paperwork that we've got from the very first few months and years of the SAS is quite thin, compared to when Mayne takes it over. Actually, the paperwork gets a lot better because Mayne is a lot more bureaucratic than Sterling. But none of the stories really reflect that. But certainly there is the real Mayne, who will probably never ever know exactly who he was. There are all the different stories of him, and then we've got our version of him, which is taking certain aspects of him and raising up those bits. But yeah, so there are a lot of people who are, I think Mayne as well, because Mayne was denied winning a VC. There is a record of his. He won an MC in 3 bars, which is, I think, is the most bars that anybody's had to win an MC. It might be joint, but for the 4th MC, his citation had VC written and then crossed out. And there are various reasons for this. The stipulations for winning a VC are quite strict, and that's why they're given out so rarely. There are people who've done amazing things, but they've got to be witnessed. There are rumours out there that Mayne was denied a VC, maybe because he was gay, maybe because he was insubordinate. There are maybe because he was colonel of the SAS that weren't particularly liked by the higher ups. There are many different versions of that story, but I think people feel that we owe him a little bit better. But all I can say is just wait for where the story is going to go. It's never going to please the diehards, but it's gonna do him all right.
George, do you feel reassured, George?
Reassured, like I was worrying. Yeah, no, that's very good to hear. But can I just share one very small thing about Paddy Mayne? It's not particularly about Rogue Heroes, but it was something that I learned when I started looking into him, and I was doing my usual nerdy Google of a day, as I do. And I found a biography of a nurse who had, it was basically just a story of her career. And at one point she had looked after Paddy Mayne after he came back from the British Antarctic Survey. And the story that she remembered was that because he loved roses, she sort of pinched a bouquet of flowers from another patient for him. And I thought, this man who's, you know, got all of these legends about all of this action, all of this, as you say, bombastic sort of flavor. And that's the thing that she took away and wanted to share with people about Paddy Mayne. And I just thought that was beautiful.
I always feel very sad that his life ended the way that it did. He, for those people that don't know, he joined the Antarctic Survey with Mike Sadler and John Tonkin. I think it was John Tonkin. But he had to come home early because he was suffering incredible back pain as a result of the parachute jumps that he'd done. And he never really got over that. He sort of ended his life. The story, it was never confirmed at the time. But he died in a car crash driving home very late at night, and the suspicion is that he was blind drunk. And so he died relatively young, and I think that, you know, there are people that have short lives and do an awful lot in that time. But the interesting thing is that the sort of main biography of Sterling was written shortly after Mayne died. And there are people, again, that have suggested that Sterling didn't want to release something while Mayne was alive because he felt that he could contradict him. Whereas once Mayne had passed, you know, there was nobody to really hold Sterling to account. So Sterling could say what he liked. And certainly the autobiography of Sterling, The Phantom Major, wasn't particularly complimentary of Mayne and didn't really give Mayne the credit that he deserved for running the SAS in the latter part of the war and being an exceptional commander in sort of the first half of the war. So, yeah, I can see why people are upset, but yeah, there are many stories about him, and I don't think all of them are true, and I don't think all of them could possibly be true, but who knows?
Yeah, we actually just did an episode on Lee Miller, and we found sort of a similar thing where even the people closest to her found her profoundly unknowable. And so even though we have, you know, our unpublished manuscripts and her photographs and all this stuff, ultimately what you see in the movie is just like a small fragment of, you know, this person that ultimately like will probably never have a good handle on. And so I feel like in your case, you know, you're not making a documentary. This character has to have a character arc, has to fit into the story in a certain way. So it kind of is what it is.
The story has changed some aspects of his life. So he was from a very middle-class, well-to-do background, but the story has made him sort of slightly lower in status. And I think this is one of the things that the Mayne family are most upset about, is that it's sort of lowered their standing. But it's so to sort of provide more of a gulf between the aristocracy of the Sterlings and Mayne. So it's not such a good story if it's middle class Mayne and upper class Sterling. But it's the wider that gulf, the more the difference, the more you exaggerate that, then that sort of is highlighting other things and creating more story. Yes, it's not totally accurate, but you know, it's all part of what Stephen Knight's trying to portray.
Well, we've been talking for a little over an hour, so maybe we'll have an eye towards wrapping up. We wanted to ask you two very important questions. The first of which is, are there any songs that you think absolutely should be on the SAS Rogue Heroes soundtrack that are not on the soundtrack?
Oh, I did, while we were filming season 2, I did draw up a list of songs that I thought should be. Let me see if I can dig up those, because we've got seasons.
You mean your Spotify playlist?
Say again?
Do you mean your Spotify playlist?
Yes, I've got a Rogue Heroes 2 one. Let me see if I can find what I put on that. War Pigs by Black Sabbath. Those About to Rock, We Salute You.
Excellent.
during season 2, because it was all filmed with sort of Sicily in mind, I started going down the route of spaghetti western soundtracks, because there were a lot of scenes that would have really suited that kind of thing. So a lot of my sort of potentials are things that are not in there because they don't fit at all. But yeah, I wonder if any of the suggestions I made, I haven't checked to compare, but I wonder if any of the suggestions I made did make it into season 2. I think one has done, actually, just looking at it now. But anything by Led Zeppelin, anything by AC/DC, but Led Zeppelin, going back to cost of the BBC, trying to get a Led Zeppelin song licensed is incredibly expensive. So unfortunately, I doubt we'll ever see a Led Zeppelin song on Rogue, but who knows? But yeah, I've got playlists filled with potential. I really like. There's a song called "Red Right Hand" by Nick Cave,
Yes.
and I love that song. I've never watched Peaky Blinders, but I've recently found out it's the theme tune to Peaky Blinders, and I don't know if that makes it more likely or less likely to turn up in Rogue, but it's a really, really, really cool track.
Yeah, it's a tune for sure.
Yeah. But
Go ahead. I was just going to ask you, are there any World War II movies or books that you think people should absolutely check out?
Great Escape. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. Go and watch it. My grandfather was in Stalingrad 3. He got shot down and then ended up there and became a forger during the Great Escape. So I've got a real love of that film. What other World War II films? A Bridge Too Far is just a brilliant film. It's very long by modern standards, but it's just a who's who of who was famous at that time. It's absolutely jam-packed with stars, and it's a brilliant film. Trying to think, Saving Private Ryan is obviously the GOAT. Bad Brothers as well. Trying to think of little known ones that people won't have seen. I wish you'd asked me this before so I could think and come up some really clever answers.
An answer that makes you sound smart. Yeah, I always think that too.
They're really educated and smart.
Yeah.
I bet you once we get off the call, I'm going to think of about 12.
Well, if you have any suggestions, we have a website, so Mark can post them on the website and people can check them out.
In fact, you did ask me this, and I completely forgot to have a think about it. I just remembered you did, and you warned me, and I completely forgot. So my bad.
Anything else you want people to take away from season 2? As we probably, as we go and watch this, we'll be very excited. Should we look out for anything specific?
No, nothing specific. PTSD is a very interesting topic because it's a very big catch-all term, and nobody reacts to war and trauma in the same way. You can have two people standing next to each other who experience exactly the same thing, and they will deal with it and react in very different ways. PTSD is very misunderstood, and a lot of people who have been to war and struggle, a lot of the people that I know don't actually struggle with the events that they've seen. It's more fitting back into regular life. It's more going from fighting a war where it's life and death, and every decision you make is crucial. Trying to reorientate yourself back into being a human being is often very difficult. And there are some films that have done it really well. American Sniper. There's a scene at the end where he's in the supermarket and he just is overwhelmed by the choice of breakfast, and it is that thing where you haven't had to think about what to eat for months because you've just been given food, and it's whatever food you've got you eat. There's no choice, and suddenly you are overwhelmed with choice. Something as simple as that could completely throw you. So we touch on it a little bit in the show, but in an episode 6, but a lot of what soldiers struggle with is reorientating and fitting back into regular life and being around people who don't understand what it is that you've been through. And this is why Sandcastle is so good, is because it's all about Nicholas Hoult not wanting to go to war. It's entirely about, the first half is him avoiding going to war. And then the end of it, his perspective has changed completely. And it's very similar with soldiers. They all, once they've been to war, they always want to go back to war because they feel that's where they are useful. That is what they've been trained for. That is what they're designed for. That's where they make the most sense. Whereas it's very difficult being a soldier in peacetime once you've been through that. So if there's one thing I want people to take away from season 2 of the show, is that warfare isn't easy, and a lot of people don't really, not they don't survive, but they will never be the same again. They will never go back to, just because they've come home, that doesn't mean they're going to mentally come back to where they were. Whatever they've been through will affect them for the rest of their lives. And it's quite a difficult thing to explain to people who've never been there. And it can be really stupid things, but the things that got me were having to deal with the mundane stuff, having to deal with those simple little things that you normally have to do, but you haven't had to do for years, suddenly having to do with tax returns, or I don't know, something like that, parking fines. It's like those little things are things that send people over the edge. It's really strange. But yeah, so that's what I want people to hold in their mind while watching, certainly the latter half. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. This has been really fun and super informative, and you gave us so much cool information. We're very excited to see season 2.
Good. Well, come back to me once you've watched it and we can talk some more.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yes.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to someone. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. We forgot to thank George. Cheers.
It's okay.
Thank you, George.
We did. I did.
I'm part of the furniture now. You can't get rid of me.
Yes, you are.
You are.